Today was day 11 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial. Among other witnesses that we heard from today, we got a bombshell coming from the general counsel of the ACLU. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. So today we heard from 4 witnesses. Yesterday, I said that we anticipated hearing more from the video deposition of Laura Wasser, but I may have been mistaken because we ended up not seeing her again today. It could have been that the rest of her portion is just rescheduled due to scheduling conflicts with the other witnesses that testified live today, or it could just be that I was mistaken about her deposition. Instead, we heard from Terrence Doherty of the ACLU, Edward White, Johnny's CPA, Malcolm Connelly, Johnny's personal security guard, and Starling Jenkins, Johnny's personal chauffeur and security detail. Although Mr. Doherty actually went first today, I'm going to save his for last in this recap to spend a little bit more time on it. So the first witness that we're talking about is Edward White, Johnny's CPA, and who I like to call the Salty CPA. Mr. White is a CPA and a financial forensics analyst who has been working with Johnny for about 6 years. According to Mr. White, financial forensics involved trying to figure out what happened to certain funds. I personally really liked Mr. White, but right off the bat, you could tell by his tone that he had some opinions about Amber Heard, hence the name Salty CPA, which is fine, except that he did start to get a bit combative on cross-examination and relatively early on in his testimony. As far as witnesses go, you don't necessarily want to see them being too combative, at least not without being first provoked by the attorney, because a jury can look at that as that sort of bias maybe coming through. In the end, I'm not so sure that that's going to make much of a difference to the jury, since his testimony really did end up coming up as a recitation of facts, but it is something that I wanted to point out just in case it is an issue for the jury. Anyway, as for the substance of his testimony, Mr. White said that initially he was tasked with doing a forensic study for Johnny and to evaluate his financial affairs to figure out how and where to fix where Johnny's money was going. Mr. White also said that on April 22nd, 2016, he called a 2-hour-long meeting with Johnny and his close team to go over the results of that study. Note that this was the day of Amber Heard's birthday, and so this was the meeting that kept Johnny from arriving at Amber's birthday dinner on time. As it turns out, Mr. White said that there were people who were essentially screwing Johnny out of a great deal of money. Mr. White said that Johnny was keenly interested in the meeting, which makes sense considering the subject matter of that meeting, but that he stepped out a couple times to correspond with Amber about the meeting and about where he was and his status and that kind of thing. When Mr. White was asked about whether they were able to get Johnny's financial picture fixed, he said that they did. And when asked about some of the budgeting items, he mentioned that Johnny previously had a very large wine budget amounting to tens of thousands of dollars per month, which actually went down to almost nothing after the divorce, which, given his tone, seemed to suggest that the one who was drinking all of the wine in the relationship was probably Amber and not so much Johnny. And speaking of the divorce, another important point that Mr. White testified to was the fact that he was involved in the divorce settlement negotiations between Johnny and Amber. According to Mr. White, Amber's demands for divorce settlement started around $5 million and went up from there all the way up to $14.5 million as a demand, tax-free. As we know, that settlement ended up landing on $7 million. Now, finally, the last point of interest that we learned from this witness is that Johnny directed Mr. White to make payments from Johnny on Amber's behalf after Amber stated publicly that she was donating her $7 million to the ACLU and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. Earlier, we learned from Johnny that he had made this switch after previously agreeing to send the money to Amber to send to these organizations. So this just basically bolsters Johnny's testimony. Next, we heard from Malcolm Connelly, Johnny's personal security guard for the past 23 to 24 years. Mr. Connelly testified via live video link, basically Zoom court, and turned out to be a delightful Scottish man. And Mr. Connolly reiterated what a bunch of other witnesses have said so far about Johnny and Amber, namely that he never saw any injuries on Amber, but he did see some marks on Johnny at various times. Particularly, Mr. Connolly said that it started with scratches on his neck before he started to see things like a fat lip, bruising on eye sockets, and more. He also talked a bit about several different arguments he saw Johnny and Amber get into over the years. One of them was an argument that occurred in the penthouses in downtown LA. Mr. Connolly said that he arrived at the penthouse where Johnny and Amber could be heard fighting with the door slightly ajar. And when he looked through that space, he said that he saw at one point a soda can launched from the mezzanine where he could hear Amber's screaming voice. Mr. Connolly said that the can hit 10 feet from Johnny onto a very large TV mounted on the wall, spraying liquid all over the place. And Mr. Connolly said that when that happened, Johnny had his jacket on with a bag over his shoulder and several other bags with him, so he and Mr. Connolly left with all the bags and without Amber. He also detailed some injuries he saw on Johnny when Johnny and Amber were on their honeymoon. Specifically, he shared a photo of the two when they were on a trip between Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur. In that photo, Mr. Connolly pointed out some swelling under Johnny's left eye, and when asked about how that happened, he said something to the effect of either he had run into a door or a door had run into him. Based on his tone, it sounded like he wasn't exactly being literal about that, maybe being a little bit more cheeky about some of the aggression that was going on behind closed doors, perhaps from Amber. Now, Mr. Connolly was also asked about drugs and alcohol consumed by Johnny over the years. According to Mr. Connolly, Johnny used to drink wine, but in the last couple of years, he dropped his alcohol intake pretty drastically. Mr. Connolly said that he's seen Johnny smoke marijuana and that it would just make him more relaxed while still functioning. And when asked about other drugs, he said that he never saw Johnny do any other drugs in front of him, although on occasion he did have suspicions that Johnny may have gone off to a bathroom or something along those lines to do a line of cocaine or some other drug. When Mr. Connolly suspected this, he said that Johnny would be a little bit more picked up and would really get into his guitar, but not much change in his demeanor other than that. Then he talked about the Australia incident in March 2015. Mr. Connolly said that on the day of the incident, he was called to come in and help. And as he approached the door, he said he could hear muffled screaming through the thick oak door. When he opened that door, he said that he saw complete chaos in the house, and Johnny was with his hat, jacket, and bag. Mr. Connolly said that Amber was screaming at Johnny, hurling F-word expletives at him, berating him, and saying that he was a coward, and Johnny was also shouting back on occasion. Mr. Connolly finally got Johnny out of the house and into the car and to the hospital to get his severed finger taken care of. Anyway, next we heard from Starling Jenkins, Johnny's personal chauffeur and security detail. Mr. Jenkins' testimony centered primarily around the events of April 22nd, 2016, give or take a day. He testified that on April 21st, 2016, the night of Amber's birthday party, he worked security detail at the penthouse until approximately 11:15 p.m. He had understood that Johnny was supposed to have arrived for dinner, but by the time Mr. Jenkins was off duty, Johnny still hadn't shown up. The next day, Mr. Jenkins arrived in the morning to pick up Amber and her friends and to take them to Coachella. Mr. Jenkins says that when he arrived, Amber had said that she and Johnny had gotten into a fight. Mr. Jenkins said that Amber had thrown Johnny's phone and wallet and passports off of the balcony of the penthouses, and he said that he learned from Amber, who said that Johnny had done the same thing with her phone. Although she had her phone at the time, Johnny's was nowhere to be seen, so he went on a mission to go and find it. Mr. Jenkins said that he had to track down the items from a homeless man on Skid Row before returning to pack the luggage into the car for Coachella. At Coachella, he testified that he saw Amber party to the point of getting sick. Mr. Jenkins says that this was due to Amber taking in red wine and magic mushrooms on an empty stomach. We've heard some testimony so far about Amber drinking and doing drugs, but this is the most colorful that we've heard so far. I do suspect that we'll hear a similar narrative coming from the Depp legal team about Amber, as we've heard from the Heard legal team about Johnny as his habits with drugs and alcohol. Even if they don't use it to say that she's addicted to drugs and alcohol, they can still use it to describe both perception issues that she may have had during these incidents, as well as some kind of interplay between these substances and the personality disorder diagnoses we've heard about so far. And last but not least, today we heard from Terrence Doherty, General Counsel of the ACLU. Like I said before, he did testify first today, but because there were some very important things that came out from his testimony, I wanted to save this one for last. So Mr. Doherty is General Counsel of the ACLU, and he touched on two very important topics. Those are the donations that Amber pledged to the ACLU out of her divorce settlement from Johnny and the revision process for the 2018 Washington Post op-ed between Amber and the ACLU. First, they went through a number of donations that were actually made to the ACLU in Amber's name. The first one was a donation from Johnny in Amber's name for $100,000. Then there were two donations from advised fund accounts. The first one was a donation for $500,000 from a Vanguard account, and the second was a donation for $350,000 from a Fidelity account. And according to Mr. Doherty, this is all Amber ever paid to the ACLU. Remember that we've heard testimony so far that she pledged publicly that she would donate the entirety of the $7 million settlement by donating half of it to the ACLU and half of it to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. But here we're finding out that only about $950,000 has been donated so far in Amber's name. And what's more, it looks like at least $600,000 of that wasn't even donated by her. You see, in addition to the $100,000 that was paid by Johnny in Amber's name, as it turns out, the $500,000 payment was also made not by Amber, but rather by none other than Elon Musk. Now, the purpose of all of this information will become most clear when video footage is introduced into evidence of Amber stating on a talk show that she actually donated, not just pledged, but donated the entire $7 million. And all of that goes to her credibility as an honest witness. But as important as that information is, even more central to the claims in this case was the other matter that Mr. Doherty covered in his deposition video testimony. Particularly, I'm talking about the back and forth of the editing process of the Washington Post op-ed between Amber and the ACLU lawyers. As it turns out, the article was essentially co-drafted by Amber and the ACLU, and they both together revised it a number of times. Initially, Amber wanted to direct more references to Johnny in the article. And the reason for that was a sentiment that both she and the ACLU lawyers apparently shared, which is that the more detail that they could include about Amber's domestic violence claims against Johnny, the more impactful the op-ed would be. And by impact, we are talking about the reaction of the masses here. The ACLU was also propping up Amber to be a domestic violence ambassador for the ACLU, something that would honestly really benefit both parties if this op-ed would be received like a firestorm. At the same time, however, the ACLU lawyers also knew that Amber had previously signed a non-disclosure agreement with Johnny, and so they wanted to reduce her potential exposure to liability for the op-ed. So the various revisions appear to have been geared towards towing that line between those two separate interests. Now, this testimony shows two important things. First, everyone involved in the writing process clearly knew that the op-ed was about Johnny. And second, this shows that not only did Amber have an incentive to lie about her domestic violence claims against Johnny, since she could get all of the fame, notoriety, and money for becoming an advocate, but that she had the ambition to actually make that happen and was actively trying to bring those benefits to herself. Now, this second piece about Amber's incentive to lie about the DV claims and her ambition to make it happen really goes to Amber's defamation claims about the statements about her making up a hoax about the DV claims. Specifically, this shows that Amber would have had every possible incentive to concoct a grand scheme showing that Johnny had committed some sort of domestic violence claims, knowing that they're false. And what's more, the Depp legal team can use all of that to say that Amber not only had the incentive, but she had the actual mental wherewithal and the ambition to put it forward, thereby disproving her claim that it was a lie, that there was a hoax involved that she was concocting. This part was so incredibly damaging to Amber's case, both for her own defamation claim against Johnny and for Johnny's defamation claim against Amber. And I honestly don't know how the Heard legal team will be able to spin it to her advantage. Only time will tell, since we now have 3 weeks left in this trial. But did you watch the testimony today? If so, let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you found this interesting or at least informative. And if you did, we would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded, and so you can join us for the next live streaming of day 12 now of this defamation trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, starting now on Monday. See you in the next video.